The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and Marigold Ashcombe was beginning to believe it never would. She stood at the tall window of the Halverston Library, her forehead pressed against glass, so cold it numbed the place where her skin met the pane. Beyond the streaked panes, the gardens of Halverston Hall lay drowned in mist, the hedges blurred to dark smudges, the gravel paths gleaming like rivers. Somewhere out there, a peacock cried, thin and mournful through the storm. Her gown was 3 seasons out of fashion and damp at the hem. The shawl across her shoulders had belonged to her mother, and it smelled, faintly and unbearably, of the lavender her mother had once kept in a chipped blue dish on the kitchen windowsill. Both were gone now. Her mother, 3 winters past, her father 6 months ago. And the chipped blue dish had been sold along with everything else to settle the smaller of the 2 debts. The larger debt was why she was standing here. A footman in dark green livery had shown her in without a word, taken her cloak with the careful neutrality of a man trained to see nothing, and left her alone in this enormous room of leather and gilt and silence. That had been 40 minutes ago. The fire had burned down twice. Marigold was not a woman who frightened easily. She had buried both her parents. She had nursed her younger sister Honora through scarlet fever in a house that could not afford coal. She had stood across a desk from her father's solicitor and listened to a man with a powdered face explain, in language so polite it was almost obscene, that she and Honora had 9 days to vacate the house in which they had been born. But this house frightened her. Not its size, not its wealth. Something colder than either. Footsteps at last in the corridor. She turned from the window, smoothing her skirts with hands that had gone unsteady despite her best efforts, and lifted her chin in the way her mother had taught her. Not haughty, my love, only certain. The double doors opened. The man who entered did not look like a duke. That was her first thought, absurd as it was. He was tall, finely dressed, the dark wool of his coat cut so precisely it seemed to have been grown rather than tailored. His hair was the color of wet sand. His face was too sharp to be called handsome, and too compelling to be called anything else. But it was his eyes that struck her, pale gray, the color of the sky before a storm broke, and absolutely, unnervingly still. Most men's eyes moved when they entered a room. His did not. They went directly to her face and stayed there as if nothing else existed. He did not bow. "Miss Ashcombe, Your Grace," she curtsied, deeply and correctly, and when she rose, he was still watching her with that same unblinking attention. "You know who I am." "I was told." "By whom?" "Your steward. In the letter." A flicker, almost too quick to catch, passed across his face. Not surprise, something more like confirmation. He crossed to the fireplace, lifted a poker, and stirred the embers with the patient violence of a man who needed somewhere to put his hands. The flames leapt up. The room warmed. He did not turn around. "Do you know why you are here, Miss Ashcombe?" "I know my father owed your father a debt of £7,000. I know the note came due 4 months ago, and that since my father's death, no payment has been made. I know your steward's letter said I had been requested to attend you here today. I know that requested in such a letter does not mean what it pretends to mean. Anything else? I know I have a sister at home who is 15 years old and has no one but me, and that whatever you are about to say to me, I cannot afford to walk out of this room before you have said it." He turned then. The gray eyes had not changed, but something behind them had. He set the poker down and crossed the room toward her until he stood close enough that she could see the small scar at the corner of his mouth and smell the rain on his coat. "Marry me," he said, "or walk away." For a long moment, the only sound was the fire. Marigold heard her own breath leave her. She heard, very distantly, the cry of the peacock again. She did not, for the space of 3 full heartbeats, hear anything else at all. "I beg your pardon," she said. "You will not need to beg. I shall not say it again. Your Grace, Cassian Vale, Duke of Halverston." His voice was perfectly even, as though he were reciting the time of day. 29 years old, sole male heir of my line, in possession of a debt against your late father's estate, which transfers to you and your sister upon his death. You are 23. Your sister is 15. You have 9 days to leave the house in Pelham Crescent, and no offer of employment that does not require you to abandon her to a workhouse. Have I omitted anything material? She could not speak. "I am offering you marriage," he continued, in that same dispassionate voice. "A real marriage in name and in law. The debt is forgiven entirely. Your sister becomes my ward, and is provided for in every particular until she comes of age. You will have a home, a title, an income, and the protection of my name. In return, you will play the part of my wife. You will conduct yourself as the Duchess of Halverston. You will give me, eventually, an heir." The last sentence struck her like cold water. She stepped back without meaning to. He did not follow. "And if I refuse? Then you walk away. Out that door, down that drive, and into whatever future awaits a young woman of your circumstances. I shall not pursue the debt. I shall not pursue you. You will have my word, in writing if you wish it, that the matter ends here." Why? The single word came out sharper than she had intended. For the first time, his composure cracked. Not visibly, not in any way another person might have caught. But Marigold had spent her life reading her father's silences, and she knew the look of a man holding something down with both hands. "That," he said, "is not part of the offer." "It is now." His jaw tightened. "Miss Ashcombe." "Your Grace, you have just asked me to marry you in the same breath you informed me my sister would otherwise starve. I am entitled to know why a man who could choose any heiress in England has chosen instead to summon a stranger and propose to her over a fire he stirred himself. You will tell me, or I will walk out that door now." The fire snapped. Cassian Vale, Duke of Halverston, looked at her for a long, slow moment, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile. Something behind a smile. "You would, wouldn't you?" he said quietly. It was not a question. "I would. Even with your sister waiting. Especially with my sister waiting. I will not buy her safety with a lie I cannot understand. She would not forgive me, and I would not forgive myself." He looked at her for so long the fire burned down another inch. Then he said, very softly, "Sit down, Miss Ashcombe. There is a great deal you do not know, and I find, to my considerable surprise, that I am about to tell you some of it." He gestured to the chair beside the fire. Marigold did not move. Her hands were shaking. Her knees were shaking. Somewhere beneath the shaking, a small, hard, clear voice she had inherited from her mother was saying, "Do not sit until you have made him understand you chose to." She remained standing. "After you, Your Grace." A second flicker crossed his face. This one she could not name. He sat, and the rain, against the windows of Halverston Hall, fell harder. He did not speak immediately. Cassian Vale leaned forward in the leather chair, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped, and stared into the fire as though it owed him an answer he had been waiting his whole life to receive. Marigold remained standing, her back to the window, the cold from the glass pressing through her gown into the place between her shoulder blades. She did not move. She had learned, in the months since her father died, that silence used correctly was the closest thing the powerless had to a weapon. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before, less precise, as though something inside him had unbuckled. My grandmother is dying." She said nothing. The physicians give her 6 weeks, possibly 8. She has known since the first frost and has refused to tell anyone but me. She is, I think, the most formidable human being I have ever met, and she is going to die in a bed she chose. And there is nothing I can do about it, except give her the one thing she has asked me for. A wife. He looked up at her. The gray eyes were not still anymore. A wife she approves of. Then choose one she approves of. She has approved of one. The match was arranged, on paper, before I was born. I was to marry the daughter of her dearest friend, Lady Persephone Cawdor. She is beautiful, accomplished, well-bred, and 3 weeks ago she informed me, in a letter, that she has been in love for 2 years with my cousin, that she is carrying his child, and that they intend to flee to the continent within the month. Marigold's breath caught. My grandmother does not know, he continued. She must not know. If she learns of it before she dies, it will not be merely the disappointment of a long-cherished plan. It will be the betrayal of her dearest friend's daughter, the disgrace of the man she raised as a second grandson, and the collapse of every arrangement she has ordered around her own death. She has buried a husband, 2 sons, and a daughter. I will not let her bury this as well. The fire popped. A log shifted. So you intend, Marigold said slowly, to present her with a different bride. A duchess she has never met. And you require that bride to be plausible enough that an old woman who has spent 60 years reading people will not see through her. Yes. Why me? Because she will not have heard of you. Because your father was a gentleman, however reduced, which protects the family name in the registers. Because you are unmarried, of marriageable age, in possession of your wits and your education. Because you have a sister whose welfare gives you reason to accept and reason to keep your word. And because, he hesitated, and the hesitation cost him visibly, because I asked my steward to find me a woman who would say no if she did not believe me. I did not want a woman I could buy. I wanted a woman I would have to convince. Marigold felt the floor shift very slightly beneath her feet. You wanted a difficult one. I wanted an honest one. Those are not the same thing, Your Grace. In my experience, he said, they very nearly are. She turned away from him then, because she could not bear, in that moment, to be looked at. She crossed to the window and pressed her palm flat against the glass and watched the rain run between her fingers on the other side of the pane. Honora, 15 years old, sitting in the Pelham Crescent house at this very moment, with cold hands and a borrowed shawl, waiting for her older sister to come home and tell her what was to become of them. Marigold did not know what her mother would have done. Mama had never been asked to marry a stranger to save her child. But Mama had once said, very quietly, on the last good evening of her life, "Marigold, my love, when the world offers you a door, look very carefully at the room behind it before you decide whether the door is the trap or the room is." Marigold turned back from the window. I have questions. Ask them. How long would the marriage last? For the rest of our lives. I will not put my grandmother's memory through a divorce, and I do not believe in annulments of convenience. If you marry me, Miss Ashcombe, you marry me. There is no clean exit at the end of the season. And the heir. Not until you wish it. Not before. You have my word. Your word is a thing I do not yet know the value of. No, he said. You do not. I have one more question, Your Grace, and I will know if you lie to me. Ask. Do you love her? Lady Persephone. Cassian Vale looked at her for a very long moment. No, he said. I never did. That is part of what frightens me. And in the silence that followed, Marigold heard the hall around them. The rain, the fire, the distant footsteps of servants in another corridor, And she understood, with a chill that had nothing to do with the window at her back, that she had not yet been told the worst of it. "You said part of what frightens you." He did not answer at once. The fire in the great hearth of the Halverston Library had burned itself down to a red, breathing thing, and Cassian Vale was looking at it as though he might see inside it the answer to a question he had not yet decided whether to ask aloud. Marigold remained where she was, hands folded at her waist, and waited. She had learned, watching her father, that men who lived behind locked doors did not respond well to knocking. They had to be allowed to open the door themselves. "There is someone else," he said at last. "Who knows? About Lady Persephone?" "About all of it." "Who?" "My grandmother's companion, a woman called Mrs. Liscombe. She has been in this house for 21 years. She nursed my mother through her last illness. She raised me when my father could not bear to look at me. And she has, I am told, recently begun to write letters to a gentleman in London, whose name I do not yet know. Letters which leave the house by the morning post, and which, my valet informs me, are not sealed in the household wax. You think she means to expose you. I think she means to be paid to keep silent, and I think she has not yet decided whether it is more profitable to be paid by me or by someone else. If she chooses someone else, my grandmother will hear the truth before the wedding. If my grandmother hears it before the wedding, there will be no wedding, because there will be nothing left to protect. Then dismiss the woman. I cannot. My grandmother loves her. Sending her away in the last weeks of her life would do precisely the damage I am trying to prevent. So you must marry quickly. Within 10 days. Marigold went very still. 10. My grandmother has been told that I have at last found a young woman of suitable family whom she will adore, and that I shall present her on Tuesday next. If I do not produce a bride by Tuesday, she will know something is wrong, and Mrs. Liscombe will know that she knows, and the entire arrangement collapses. If I do produce a bride," his eyes lifted to Marigold's, and for the first time there was no dispassion in them at all, "then we marry within 10 days of that presentation, in my own chapel, before witnesses my grandmother trusts. Once you are my wife in the registers, Mrs. Liscombe loses the value of what she carries, because there is no version of the truth that does her any good after that. You require me to be your wife in 10 days. I require you to become her promised bride in 4. The wedding can wait a little. The presentation cannot." The room was very quiet. Marigold became aware, slowly, of a small, foolish thing. A clock on the mantel was ticking. She had not noticed it before. It had been ticking the whole time. It would tick whether she said yes or no. "You have not asked me," she said, "what I require." "No," he said, "I have not. Because I do not yet know what you will require, and because I suspect that whatever it is, I shall agree to it." She looked at him sharply. "That is a dangerous sentence, Your Grace. It is an honest one. I have not been able to afford honest sentences in some time. You will permit me 1 or 2. She crossed to the chair opposite him at last, and sat down. Not because he had invited her, because her knees had decided the matter without consulting the rest of her. The leather was warm, the fire was close. She folded her hands again, but this time in her lap, because the gesture of standing one's ground became absurd once one was sitting. "3 conditions," she said. "Name them." "First, my sister Honora comes to Halverston Hall the same day I do, not later, not after the wedding. The same carriage, if possible. She will be treated as my sister and your ward, not as a charity placed in the corner. If I see her ill-used in any small or large particular, I shall consider our agreement broken." "Done." "Second, I will not be lied to in this house. Not by you, not by your servants, not by your grandmother, if it can be avoided. If something is happening under this roof that touches my life or my sister's, I will be told. I have spent my life being the last to know the worst, Your Grace. I will not enter a marriage on the same terms. He inclined his head once. Done. Third, she paused. The third was harder. Go on. Third, if, at any point in this marriage, you take a mistress, or fall in love with another woman, or decide that the bargain we are about to strike was a mistake, you will tell me. Not the household, not the world. Me, before anyone else. I will not be shamed in public, and I will not be the last to know my own life. In return, if I ever find that I cannot bear what I have agreed to, I shall come to you first as well. We will not be strangers in our own marriage. For a long moment he did not speak. When he did, his voice was lower than she had heard it. Miss Ashcombe. Yes. You are not what I expected. You did not know what to expect. Your steward chose me from a list. I have been thinking, while you spoke, that perhaps he chose better than either of us understood. She looked away. Her face was warm, and she did not wish him to see it. Do we have an agreement, Your Grace? We do. He rose. She rose. He held out his hand, not the formal half-bow of a gentleman to a lady, but a hand offered the way one merchant offered another at the end of a hard negotiation. The gesture was so unexpected and so exactly right that she almost laughed. She took his hand. His grip was firm. Through the leather of his glove, she could feel a single faint ridge of an old scar across the back of his fingers. There is one thing, he said, still holding her hand, that I did not tell you. She froze. It is not a betrayal. It is a warning. My grandmother will adore you within an hour of meeting you, and she will believe, for the rest of the time she has left, that I have at last done something right. That belief is what we are buying with this arrangement. But Miss Ashcombe, when she dies, and she will die, you will be the woman who held her hand at the end of it, and I will be the man who watched you do it. I do not yet know what kind of marriage that makes. I want you to know, before you sign the register, that neither do you. He released her hand. The fire cracked, low and red. Outside in the streaming dusk, a carriage was already being prepared at the front of the house, though Marigold did not know it yet, to fetch a 15-year-old girl from a cold drawing room in Pelham Crescent and bring her, before nightfall, to a place she had never seen, and somewhere on the upper floor of Halverston Hall, in a corridor lined with portraits of Vale ancestors who had all married for love or for land, and never, until tonight, for both, a woman called Mrs. Liscombe was sealing a letter without the household wax. The carriage came for Honora at 6:30. Marigold rode in it herself, because she could not bear to send a stranger to fetch her sister out of the only house either of them had ever known. The Halverston carriage was lacquered black, drawn by two greys with breath like smoke in the rain, and the cushions were the color of old wine. Marigold sat very straight on them, and tried not to think about the fact that she was going home in a vehicle she did not own, to collect her sister and never sleep in their own beds again. Honora was waiting in the front parlor with her coat already on. She had packed, without being told, 2 valises and the small wooden box that had been their mother's. She was a thin girl with their father's dark hair and their mother's startling green eyes, and when she saw Marigold step through the door, she did not run to her. She stood very still in the middle of the rug and said, in a voice that was almost steady, "Are we to be all right?" "Yes," Marigold said. "You are certain?" "I am certain." Honora nodded once, the way she had taken to nodding since their father died, and picked up the smaller of the 2 valises herself. Halverston Hall by night was a different country than Halverston Hall by day. The drive was lit by lanterns set on iron poles, each one a small, trembling pool of gold in the streaming dark, and the front of the house rose up out of the rain like the prow of a ship. There were footmen on the steps with umbrellas. There was a housekeeper in the doorway in a black gown and a white cap, and behind her a long gallery of warm light, and the smell, faint and astonishing, of fresh bread. Honora's hand found hers in the dark of the carriage, and did not let go. "Mari," she whispered, "I know. It's so big. I know. Are you all right?" Marigold turned her head and looked at her sister in the lantern light, at the small, pale, brave face under the wet hood, and she understood for the first time, fully and without flinching, that she had made the right choice. Whatever else this house contained, she had bought this warm gallery, this bread, this girl beside her with a hand that was no longer cold. "I am all right," she said, and discovered as she said it that it was not a lie. The housekeeper introduced herself as Mrs. Penhallow, with the careful neutrality of a woman who had decided to reserve judgment, and led them through corridors that smelled of beeswax and wood smoke. Honora was given the room directly beside Marigold's. The two doors connected through a small dressing room, and when Mrs. Penhallow said, "I thought, miss, you might like to be near each other the first night," Marigold turned her head sharply and saw that the woman was not looking at her at all, but at Honora, and that her stern mouth had softened by perhaps 1/4 of an inch. It was the first kindness in the house, and Marigold did not forget it. A maid named Susanna was assigned to her, younger than Marigold, with quick brown hands and a Yorkshire accent, and she laid out a nightgown of fine cambric and apologized for the fit before she had been asked. "His Grace sent down for it from the linen room, miss. We'll have your own things proper by morning." Marigold sat on the edge of the bed when the maid had gone. The mattress did not creak. The sheets had been warmed. Someone had set on the small writing table by the window a plate with 2 slices of bread and butter, an apple cut into quarters, and a glass of milk. She had not eaten since morning. She ate standing at the window, watching the rain, and pressed her hand flat against the cold glass once, and held it there until the warmth of her palm fogged the pain and erased, for a single private moment, the great dark gardens of Halverston Hall. Tomorrow she would meet his grandmother. Tonight she had bread. The Dowager Duchess of Halverston did not believe in mornings. She received her grandson's intended at 11 o'clock precisely in the Rose sitting room on the south side of the house, and Marigold understood within 30 seconds of crossing the threshold that the room had been chosen for the light. Sun came through 3 tall windows and fell directly on the chair in which the visitor was meant to sit. The Dowager's own chair stood with its back to the brightness, so that her face remained in shadow, while every flicker on her guest's was illuminated like a page of evidence. Marigold registered this and admired it, in the way one admires the work of a master. "Sit down, Miss Ashcombe." The voice was thinner than she had expected. The woman it came from was not. The Dowager was small, smaller than Marigold had imagined a woman of such reputation could be, and propped against 3 pillows in a high-backed chair, with a shawl of dark blue cashmere over her knees, and a single ring on her right hand that caught the sun whenever she moved her fingers. Her hair was white, drawn back, perfectly dressed. Her eyes were the same pale gray as her grandson's, and they were not still. They moved over Marigold's face the way a clockmaker's eyes move over the inside of a watch. Cassian stood by the window. He did not sit. He looked at his grandmother as though she were a candle he was afraid to take his eyes off. "You are very calm, Miss Ashcombe. I am terrified, Your Grace. I have decided not to show it." A pause. Then the Dowager's mouth lifted at one corner, very slightly. and Marigold understood that she had passed the first gate. "Sit closer." Marigold did. The chair was warm in the sun. The dowager's hand came out from the shawl and rested on the armrest of her own chair, and Marigold saw, with a small, unwelcome stab of recognition, that the skin across the back of it was the same paper-thin skin her father's had been in the last weeks of his life. She looked away. "My grandson tells me," the dowager said, "that you are the daughter of Edmund Ashcombe." "Yes, Your Grace. I knew your father a little, many years ago. He was at Cambridge with my younger son. They were not friends, but they were not enemies, which in my experience is the more interesting category. I was sorry to hear of his death." "Thank you. Your mother?" "3 winters passed. And there is a sister, Honora. She is 15. Cassian tells me she is to live here." "Yes, Your Grace. That was a condition." "Yes, Your Grace. I demanded it of him." The dowager looked at her for a long moment, and then turned her head and looked at her grandson. "Cassian, sit down. You are making the room nervous." He sat. "Now, Miss Ashcombe, I am going to tell you something I have not told my grandson, and I expect you to keep it to yourself, because if you cannot keep small confidences, you are no use to me with the larger ones. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Grace. I have known for nearly a year that I am dying. The physicians give me weeks. I do not entirely believe them. I have outlived 2 physicians already, but I believe them enough. I did not tell my grandson until the autumn, because he loved his father very much, and he has not been the same man since his father's death. Do you have any idea, Miss Ashcombe, what it is like to die slowly in a house full of people who have not yet been told?" Marigold's throat closed. "No, Your Grace. It is lonely, that is all. One sits in a chair and watches the people one loves move about the room, and one knows, in a way they do not know, that one will not be in this chair next year, and they will, and the air between you becomes very heavy. I tell you this so that you will understand what I am about to ask of you, and why." She paused. The single ring caught the light. "I do not believe Persephone Cawdor will ever marry my grandson." Marigold's breath stopped. She did not look at Cassian. She did not dare. "I do not know what has gone wrong between them," the dowager continued, with the calm of a woman who had decided long ago to walk straight at a thing rather than around it. "And I do not need to know. I have known Persephone since she was an infant. I love her. But I have watched her these past 2 years, and I have watched my grandson, and they are not 2 people who will stand together at an altar. I am told you are to be presented as his promised bride on Tuesday, and I have decided to permit it without asking my grandson a single question. Because if he has chosen you for a reason, and I would rather discover the reason from you than from him." Marigold could not speak. "Look at me, Miss Ashcombe." She looked. "I am not asking you to confess anything. I am telling you that I am not a fool, and that you are not in the room with one. If you marry my grandson, you will marry him with my blessing, because I would rather see him married to a stranger of good character than left alone in this house when I am gone. But you will not lie to me, child, not about small things, and not about large ones. If you lie to me, I shall know, and I shall have the marriage stopped, and I shall do it from this chair, and I shall not require to leave it. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Say it properly." "We understand each other, Your Grace." The dowager nodded once. Then, to Marigold's astonishment, her hand moved across the small distance between their chairs and rested, light as a leaf, on Marigold's wrist. It was a brief touch. It was not affectionate, but it was undeniably human. "You have honest eyes," the old woman said. I have not seen honest eyes in this house in a very long time. Be careful with them." She withdrew her hand. "Cassian, take her away. I am tired." In the corridor outside, with the door closed behind them, Cassian Vale stopped walking. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes for a single second. "She knows," Marigold said quietly. "Yes." "She has known." "Yes." "Then why?" "Because," Cassian said, "she is giving me a chance to do one thing right before she goes. And she does not yet know that the woman I have brought into her house is going to be a great deal harder to deceive than either of us bargained for. Walk with me, Miss Ashcombe. There is someone in this house I would rather you met before they meet you." He led her by a route that was not the route a guest would have been led. They passed through a baize-lined door behind a tapestry, down a narrow stair the servants used, and out into a small octagonal room she could not have found again on her own if she had tried for a month. There was a single window. There were 2 chairs. There was a kettle on a small iron stand over a spirit lamp, and the kettle was already steaming. "Sit," Cassian said. "You are trying to keep this conversation off the main floor of the house." "I am. Mrs. Liscombe takes her tea in the morning room at this hour, and the morning room shares a chimney with the green drawing room, and a clever woman with an ear to the right wall can hear half of any conversation conducted on the south side of the house. I have known this since I was 9. Mrs. Liscombe has known it longer." Marigold sat. He did not pour the tea. He stood by the window and looked out of it for a moment, as though gathering something, and then he turned and looked directly at her. "My grandmother said something to you in there that did not expect. That she knows about Persephone." "Yes." "Did you not believe she would?" "I believed she might guess. I did not believe she would tell me to my face that she had guessed, with you in the room on the first morning of your acquaintance. She likes you. She does not know me. She likes you precisely because she does not know you. She has spent 81 years being lied to by people she knows. You are a new chance for her. And that, Miss Ashcombe, is going to make Mrs. Liscombe more dangerous, not less. Tell me about her." He sat. He did pour the tea now, the gesture absent and exact. He handed her a cup. The china was very thin. The handle was warm. "She came to this house," he said, "the year my mother became ill. She was hired as a nurse companion, gentry by birth, ruined by circumstance. She was, I am told, 26. My mother was 31. Within 4 months, my mother was dead, and Mrs. Liscombe had stayed on to nurse my father through the grief that followed. She has been in this house ever since. 31 years. 31 years. And in all that time, she has never married. No. She has never left. No. She has watched 3 generations of your family live and die, and she has remained in the same corridors, and she has poured the same tea, and she has been paid, I assume, a companion's wages. You see where I am going? I see exactly where you are going." Marigold set her cup down. The tea was very good. Someone in this house knew how to make tea exactly to Cassian Vale's preference, and had been making it that way for 21 years, and had never been thanked. "She is not a villain," Marigold said slowly. "Not yet. No. She is a woman who has been overlooked for 21 years, and who has just realized that she has perhaps 4 months left, in which the overlooking can be made to pay her something." "Yes." "And the letters?" He hesitated. "My valet has, at my instruction, made notes of the addresses to which her correspondence is sent. There are 3. One is a sister in Bath. One is a small parish in Norfolk. The third," he paused, "the third is a gentleman in London called Mr. Selwyn Trenoweth, who is not a friend, who is not a relative, and whom I have never heard her mention in this house. You have had him investigated. I have. And he is a journalist of a particular kind. He does not write under his own name. He writes for two of the more aggressive society weeklies, and his specialty is the discreet exposure of arrangements of the sort I have made with you." The room was very quiet. "How long have they been corresponding?" "6 weeks. Then she began writing to him before you proposed to me." "She began writing within 4 days of Persephone's letter to me. I do not know how she knew. She has access to the silver salver in the front hall, where post is laid for collection. She would only have needed to recognize Persephone's handwriting, which she has known since Persephone was 7. And what exactly has she been writing to him? I do not know. She does not seal her letters in the household wax, but she is too clever to leave them open. She is, I think, sending him something in stages, building a story, waiting to be paid for the whole." "Then why has she not been paid yet?" He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Your Grace, that if she had what she wanted from him, she would have stopped writing. If she has been writing for 6 weeks, it is because the negotiation is ongoing. She has not yet given him the peace he needs, and until she does, you have time." Cassian Vale stared at her. "You think clearly. People who cannot afford confusion learn not to indulge in it. I'm going to ask you to do something I have no right to ask. I want you to befriend her." She set the cup down for the second time, and this time it rattled in the saucer. "You want me to, not to spy on her, not to entrap her. I want you to sit with her, take tea with her, walk in the gardens with her. Let her see you for who you are. Because the one thing that might persuade Mrs. Liscombe not to send the next letter is the discovery that the Duchess of Halverston is not the woman she expected. That the Duchess of Halverston is someone she could have liked if she had been allowed to. You are asking me to make her hesitate. I am asking you to make her see. And if she sees and writes the letter anyway, then we will know, and we will move." Marigold looked at him for a long moment. "You understand," she said, "that what you are describing is not a plot. It is a kindness with a knife behind its back. I am not certain I am the woman to do it. You are exactly the woman to do it. You are the only person in this house who has nothing to gain by lying to her. If anyone in this household has a chance of reaching her, it is you." She closed her eyes. She thought of Honora, asleep 2 corridors away in a bed neither of them had paid for. She thought of the dowager's hand on her wrist. She thought of a woman who had come to this house at 26 and been forgotten in plain sight for 21 years, and who had finally decided to become a problem someone would have to solve. She opened her eyes. "I will meet her. I will make no promises beyond that. That is all I ask. And Your Grace, if, in befriending her, I come to believe she has been wronged in this house, I will not pretend otherwise. If you cannot bear that, tell me now." Cassian Vale looked at her, and the gray eyes were not still. "I can bear it," he said. They walked back by a different route, and on the way Marigold met Mrs. Liscombe. She was coming down the great stair as they were crossing the hall. A slim, upright woman in a gray gown, perhaps 47, with iron-colored hair drawn back in a coil and a face that had once been beautiful and was now only remarkable. She moved without sound. She had the habit of not looking at the person she was greeting until the last possible moment, so that the gaze, when it came as a small shock. "Your Grace, Mrs. Liscombe, may I present Miss Ashcombe, my intended?" The gray eyes lifted to Marigold's face. The shock came. "Miss Ashcombe? Mrs. Liscombe, I have heard a great deal of you already, and all of it kind." It was a small lie, and it was the right one. Marigold saw the woman register it, saw the brief, almost imperceptible recalibration behind the gray eyes, and saw, too, the flicker of something that was not yet hostility, but was no longer indifference. "You are very kind, Miss Ashcombe. Will you take tea with me tomorrow? I am told the gardens are walked in the afternoon, but it is too wet, and I am told nothing of this house, and you have been in it longer than anyone." A pause. "I should be honored, Miss Ashcombe. At 3? At 3. Mrs. Liscombe inclined her head, the smallest possible inclination, and continued down the stair and out of the hall. The door at the end of the gallery closed behind her with the softest possible click. Cassian Vale exhaled. Marigold had not noticed, until that moment, that he had been holding his breath. "You are remarkable, Miss Ashcombe. I am terrified. I have decided not to show it." He looked at her, and for the first time since she had entered Halverston Hall, the corner of his mouth lifted into something that was almost, a smile. "Yes," he said. "I am beginning to learn that about you." He bowed and left her at the foot of the stair. Marigold stood alone in the great hall for a long moment, the rain still streaming on the windows, the fire in the far hearth burning steadily down, and she became aware, slowly, of a single fact she had not allowed herself to consider yet. She had, 4 hours ago, been a woman with no future at all. She was now a woman with 3. The first was the future she had bargained for: marriage to Cassian Vale, the saving of her sister, the title and the protection, and the long, quiet years of a life she had not chosen. The second was the future Mrs. Liscombe could end with a single letter: scandal, exile, a return to the house in Pelham Crescent that would no longer exist. The third was the future she did not yet have a name for, the one in which the man who had stood by the window with his back to the light had that morning looked at her exactly once, as though he were memorizing something. She climbed the stairs to find her sister. Behind her, on the polished hall table, a new letter sat on the silver salver, addressed to Mr. Selwyn Trenoweth at an address in Bloomsbury, and sealed with plain wax. It had not been there an hour ago. The tea with Mrs. Liscombe took place at 3, exactly as agreed, in the small sitting room off the orangery, where the light came through frosted glass and softened everything it touched. Marigold poured. Mrs. Liscombe permitted it, which Marigold understood to be a concession. They spoke first of the weather, and then of the gardens, and then, by a careful drift, Marigold did not direct, but did not resist, of the year Mrs. Liscombe had first come to Halverston Hall. "His Grace's mother," she said, in a voice that had no particular weight to it, "kept canaries, 3 of them, yellow as butter. She let them out in the morning room while she took her chocolate, and they would land on the rim of her cup. I have not thought of those birds in 20 years. What became of them? They died, Miss Ashcombe. Birds do." A pause. "She was very fond of them. I confess I was not. They sang incessantly, and they were not, in my opinion, intelligent. But I cleaned their cages every morning for the last month of her life, because she could no longer rise from her bed, and she liked to be told what they were doing. That was a kindness. It was a duty. It can be both." Mrs. Liscombe looked at her then, properly looked at her, and with the full gray weight of those eyes, and Marigold understood that she had said something slightly wrong. The woman across from her had spent 21 years inside a definition of herself that did not include the word kindness, and being offered the word had cost her something to refuse. "You are very young, Miss Ashcombe." "I'm 23. You speak as though you have decided certain things already." "I have. I have not had the luxury of deferring decisions." "What have you decided?" "That I will not become a woman who pretends not to know what she knows. That seems to me the worst thing one could become." Mrs. Liscombe did not answer. She drank her tea. She set the cup down. She rose, and she said, with the careful courtesy of a woman closing a door without slamming it, "Thank you, Miss Ashcombe. Perhaps another, before the wedding. I should like that. At 3 on Friday. At 3. She left. Marigold sat for a long time afterwards in the empty room, watching the frosted light move on the polished floor, and she understood that she had not befriended Mrs. Liscombe. She had done something else. She had let Mrs. Liscombe see her, and what Mrs. Liscombe had seen had unsettled her in a way Marigold could not yet measure. That night, after Honora had gone to bed, Marigold could not sleep. She rose, drew on her dressing gown, took up the candle Susanna had left on the mantel, and went out into the dark corridor in search of a book. The library was at the far end of the south gallery. She did not expect to find anyone there at midnight. He was sitting in the chair by the fire. He had a glass in his hand and a book open on his knee, and he was not reading the book. He was staring into the fire, the way a man stares at a thing he has been arguing with for hours and has not yet defeated. He looked up when she came in, and he did not rise, which was a small breach of etiquette and a larger admission of fatigue. "Miss Ashcombe." "Your Grace, I did not mean to disturb you. I came for a book. I shall stay." She stopped. "Stay," he said again, more quietly. "Please." She crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite his. Between them the fire burned low and red. The book on his knee, she saw now, was poetry, a small green volume bound in worn leather, the corners softened from much handling. "You could not sleep," he said. "No. My sister keeps waking. She came into my bed twice tonight before she settled. She does not say so, but she is afraid the house will be taken away again before morning." He closed the book carefully and held it in his lap. "That will not happen. I know. She does not yet. How old was she when your father lost his fortune? 11. That is the age at which a child first learns that adults can fail and that the failing has consequences. She will not entirely recover from it. She will only learn to carry it more lightly. I am sorry, Miss Ashcombe." She looked at him. "How old were you when you learned that adults could fail?" The fire snapped. He did not answer at once. He picked up the glass, looked at the dark wine in it, set it down again without drinking. The scar at the corner of his mouth was very visible in the low light. 8. "What was the failure?" "My mother." "She failed you." "She died. I had been told for 2 years that she would not. By my father, by Mrs. Liscombe, by every adult in this house who had decided that a child should be protected from the truth. I came home from the schoolroom on a particular morning in November, and a maid I didn't know took my hand and led me to a room I had not been allowed to enter for 6 weeks. And my mother was in the bed in that room, and she was no longer my mother, and I was 8 years old, and no one had told me she was going." Marigold did not speak. She did not, in that moment, dare to speak. She had asked the question lightly. She had not expected to be handed a child. "I'm sorry," she said at last. "Do not be sorry. Be aware. I have lived my entire life since that morning under one rule, which is that I will not be the man who fails to tell. I have broken that rule precisely once in my adult life, with regard to my grandmother's illness, and I have broken it badly. And it is one of the reasons I am sitting in this chair tonight, unable to sleep. You did not break it. She broke it. She knew. She did not tell you. That is generous of you. It is accurate." He looked at her. The fire, in that moment, did something to his face that the daylight had not done. It softened the sharp lines of his mouth. It put a warmth into the gray eyes that they didn't, by their own nature, possess. It made him, for an instant, not a duke at all, but a man of 29 who had been awake too long and was allowing himself, perhaps for the first time in months, to be looked at. Marigold became aware that she did not wish to look away. "Miss Ashcombe." "Yes. I'm going to give you something. It is not a gift. It is a thing I want you to have, because I don't wish to be the only person in this house who knows it exists." He held out the small green book. "This was my mother's. There is a letter inside the front cover, folded against the binding that she wrote in the last month of her life. My father gave it to me on my 21st birthday. I do not propose to read it to you. But there is one line in it that I wish someone other than myself knew about, because I think that if I am the only person who knows, I will eventually convince myself I imagined it. May I tell you the line? Please. He did not need to open the book. Cassian, my love, when you are grown, do not marry a woman who is afraid of you. Marry one who is not afraid of anything, and then spend your life learning why. The fire cracked. Marigold could not, for a long moment, breathe. That is a remarkable sentence. Yes, she was a remarkable woman. I don't know. I was 8. I have only the sentence, and a few other pieces, and the canaries Mrs. Liscombe spoke of this afternoon, which I had also forgotten existed. He held out the book again, more deliberately this time. Take it. Keep it for me. I do not, tonight, wish to be the one carrying it. She took it. The leather was warm from his hands. She held it against her chest for a moment without meaning to. Your Grace. Yes. I am not afraid of you. He looked at her across the firelight. I had begun to suspect that, Miss Ashcombe. I find that I am very glad of it. She did not stay much longer. She rose, and she said good night, and she carried the small green book up the stairs to her own room, and she set it on the table beside her bed. She did not read it. She lay awake in the dark, with Honora's small, steady breathing on the other side of the dressing room door, and she thought, with the particular clarity that comes only at 1 in the morning in a house one doesn't yet own, I am in trouble, and I do not know yet whether it is worse or better. Outside, the rain had stopped. The presentation on Tuesday went, by every external measure, perfectly. The Dowager, propped on her cushions in the long drawing room, received the 4 witnesses she had selected: an elderly bishop, 2 distant cousins of impeccable reputation, and her oldest friend, Lady Wraxhall, and announced, in a voice that carried more strength than her body now contained, that her grandson had at last consented to be a sensible man, and that the young woman beside him was her own choice, as much as his. Marigold stood through it with her hand resting on Cassian's sleeve, and did not, for 1 moment of the 40 it required, allow her face to slip. The bishop blessed them. The cousins toasted them. Lady Wraxhall, who was 80 and astonishingly direct, took Marigold's chin in 2 thin fingers, turned her face left and right in the light, and pronounced her fit for the work, which Marigold understood to be the highest compliment the woman possessed. Persephone Cotter wasn't there. She had sent that morning a short and beautifully composed letter of regret. The Dowager had read it, smiled the smallest possible smile, and tucked it into her shawl without comment. Mrs. Liscombe was there. She stood at the back of the room, neither in service nor in society. She did not speak. She did not, that Marigold could see, take her eyes from the floor. When the bishop pronounced his blessing, Mrs. Liscombe's hands tightened once on the edge of her gray shawl and then released. It was after the witnesses had left, and after the Dowager had been carried back to her bed, and after Honora had been kissed good night by the old woman who had asked the girl, very quietly, whether she might be permitted to call her Honora rather than Miss Ashcombe. It was after all of that, when the house had gone dark and Marigold was crossing the upper gallery in her own shawl with her own candle, that she heard the voices. They were coming from the small writing room at the end of the gallery. The door was not quite closed. The voices were low, but the gallery carried sound, and Marigold's feet, by some instinct older than thought, slowed. "Have asked you for an answer, Mrs. Liscombe. I am not asking again." Cassian's voice, tighter than she had ever heard it. "Your Grace, I am not in a position. You are in precisely the position I have placed you in. I know about Mr. Trenoweth. I know about the letters. I know the dates. I know the addresses. I know the wax. What I don't know is what you have told him and what you have not. And you will tell me now, or you will leave this house in the morning, and you will leave it without the pension my grandfather promised you." A long silence. Marigold did not move. The candle in her hand was trembling very slightly. She covered the flame with her palm. When Mrs. Liscombe spoke again, her voice was different. It was the voice of a woman who had been holding a thing for a very long time, and had just been given permission to set it down. "I have told him nothing yet. Nothing. Nothing he could print. I have told him there is a story. I have told him I am willing to provide it. I have told him my price. He has not yet agreed to it, and I have not yet sent him the matter itself. The letter on the table this morning was a refusal, Your Grace. I had decided this afternoon that I would not do it." Cassian's voice, when it came, was very low. "Why? Because of her? Miss Ashcombe?" "Yes." "What did she say to you?" "She asked me about your mother's canaries. She did not know they had ever existed. She asked me about them as though they mattered. No one in this house has asked me about anything that mattered in 21 years, Your Grace. I have been a fixture. I have not been a person. I had decided, some time ago, that I would make myself a person in the only way that was available to me, which was to make myself dangerous. And now I have been asked about canaries by a young woman who will, in 3 weeks, be the mistress of this house, and who, I think, will ask me about other things. I find I do not wish to be dangerous to her. I find I wish to be asked." The silence in the writing room was now of a different kind altogether. "Mrs. Liscombe, Your Grace, will you give me Mr. Trenoweth's letters to you? All of them. Tonight. I have kept them. Will you write to him, in my presence and in my hand if you prefer, and tell him that the matter is closed?" "I will." "Will you remain in this house?" A pause. "If you wish me to, Your Grace. My grandmother wishes you to. So does my future wife. So, I find, do I? A longer pause. Then I shall remain." Marigold pressed herself flat against the wall of the gallery and willed her candle not to go out. Her heart was striking against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She had not been meant to hear this. She had not been meant to know that he had moved without her, that he had confronted the woman alone, that he had won, if winning was the word, without making her party to a kindness with a knife behind its back. She understood, in that moment, 2 things at once. The first was that Cassian Vale had spared her the act she had told him she did not wish to perform. He had taken it onto himself. The second was that, at the end of the corridor, in the small writing room with its half-closed door, a woman stepped out into the gallery and turned, and her gray eyes met Marigold's across the dark. And Mrs. Liscombe did not say a word, did not raise the alarm, did not even change her expression. She simply inclined her head, the smallest possible inclination, and the same one she had given on the stair the day they met. And she walked past Marigold without speaking, and went down the stairs, and was gone. She turned, and she walked back along the gallery to her own room, and she did not sleep at all that night, because she had just understood that she was, in some way she could not yet name, beginning to love him. And she had no script in the world for loving the man you had already agreed to wed for reasons that had nothing to do with love. She left in the morning. It was the Wednesday, the day after the presentation, 10 days before the wedding, and she rose before the house was awake, dressed in her own clothes from her own valise, and woke Honora with a hand on her shoulder. "Get up, we're going home." "Mari, get up!" Honora got up. She did not ask. She had learned in 15 years of being Marigold's sister that there were moments at which questions were a luxury neither of them could afford, and this was one of them. They went on foot to the village. Marigold had not the courage to ring for a carriage. They walked the 2 miles down the long drive in the half-light of a December morning, with their breath in the air and their valises bumping against their knees. And at the village inn, Marigold paid the last of her own money for 2 seats on the morning coach to London. She left, at the inn, a single letter to be delivered to Halverston Hall. She gave it to the innkeeper's wife, a kind, broad woman with red hands, and she said, "An hour after the coach has gone, please. Not before." The innkeeper's wife looked at her for a long moment and said, "You are the one who is to marry the Duke." "Yes." "And you are not going to." "I am going home." "Child," said the innkeeper's wife, with the directness of a woman who had been awake since 4. "Is he a bad man?" "No." "Then why?" Marigold did not answer at once. She looked at this stranger, this woman with red hands in a village inn, and she said very quietly, "Because I cannot marry him for the reasons we agreed to, and I cannot marry him for the reasons I would prefer, and I do not know how to marry him for both at once, and I am going home to think." The innkeeper's wife nodded slowly. "That is the most sensible thing I have heard a young woman say in this tap room in 20 years. I shall hold the letter for an hour. One is enough." The coach left at 7:30. Marigold sat by the window, with Honora pressed against her shoulder, and watched Halverston Hall slip past in the distance. The long, pale facade, the bare trees, the rooks lifting from the chimneys. And she pressed her forehead against the cold glass once, and held it there until the warmth of her skin fogged the pain, and the great house was gone. The letter she had left was 4 lines long. "Your Grace, I am going home for 3 days. I shall return on Saturday morning, if you still wish me to. If you do not, I shall understand, and the bargain you offered me will be considered void by my own choice, with no obligation on your part. I take with me my sister and my own clothes only. Everything else is yours. The small green book your mother left to you is on the table beside the bed in the room I was given. I did not feel I had the right to take it. Marigold Ashcombe." She had not signed it yours. She had not, she told herself, the right. In London, the house in Pelham Crescent was empty. It had not yet been let. The new tenants were not to arrive until the new year. Marigold, who still had the key, let them in by the kitchen door, and made up 2 beds with linens she had left folded in the press, and lit a fire in the parlor with the last of the coal she had not yet sold. She did not, that day, eat. She did not, that night, sleep. Honora, who had not asked a single question on the coach, asked at last, in the dark of their old shared bedroom with her face turned to the wall, "Mari, are we coming back?" "I do not know." "Do you want to?" A long silence. "Yes." "Then why?" "Because I do not know if he wants me to come back as the woman I was when I left, or as the woman I had been pretending to be. And I don't know if I can be the second, and I don't know if he will have the first." Honora was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, with the small, flat clarity of a 15-year-old who has spent 4 years being older than her age, "Mari, he was watching you at the presentation. The whole time. He did not look away once. I noticed because I was bored. And he was the only person in the room who was looking at one person." Marigold did not answer. In the dark, in the cold house in Pelham Crescent, that had been her home for 23 years, and would not be her home for 1 more day, Marigold Ashcombe turned her face into the pillow and wept without sound. It was Wednesday night. She had told him she would return on Saturday. She did not yet know that at Halverston Hall, by the time her letter had been delivered, by the time he had read it twice in the small writing room where he had confronted Mrs. Liscombe the night before. Cassian Vale was already in the saddle of the fastest horse in his stable, and was already on the London road, and was not waiting for Saturday. He arrived at Pelham Crescent at 4 in the morning. The horse had gone lame at Brentford, and he had taken a post horse the rest of the way, and his coat was wet to the lining, and his boots were ruined, and he had not slept, and he did not care. He stood in the dark street outside the small, narrow house with the dark windows, and he understood, with the clarity that comes only at 4 in the morning to a man who has been wrong about everything for some time, that he had ridden 18 hours not to fetch her back, but to apologize. He had not, in 29 years, had occasion to learn how. He raised his hand to the knocker. He lowered it. He raised it again. The door opened before he could touch it. Honora stood on the threshold in a dressing gown, with a candle, with their mother's green eyes huge in the small white face, and she said, in a voice that was perfectly steady, "I heard the horse. She is in the parlor. She has not slept. Please be kind to her. She is the only person I have. I will. Promise. I promise." Honora stepped aside. Marigold was sitting on the floor in front of the cold grate in her dressing gown, with her hair down her back, and she had a single match in her hand, and she had been trying, unsuccessfully, for some time, to light the last small heap of coal Honora had carried in from the cellar. She turned her head when he came into the room, and she did not stand up. "Your Grace." Marigold. It was the first time he had used her name. "You are not meant to be here until Saturday." "I'm not meant to be here at all. I'm meant to be at Halverston, signing settlements, and I have left them on a desk for a man I am not currently inclined to be." "Cassian, let me speak." She was quiet. He knelt. He did not bend at the knee in the formal way. He went down onto the cold floorboards in front of the cold grate, the way a man kneels in a stable to a horse that has been frightened, slowly and with both knees, and without taking his eyes off her. "I have been," he said, "an extraordinary fool." "You have not. Permit me." "I have. I summoned you to my house in the rain, and I offered you a bargain, and I gave you, in exchange for your entire life, a list of conditions and a debt forgiven, and I told myself I had been honorable about it because I had told you the truth. I had not. I had told you the part of the truth that was convenient to me. I did not tell you that I had asked my steward, 6 weeks ago, to find me not a wife, but a person. I did not tell you that I had read the small notes he made on each candidate, and that I had set yours aside on the first reading and had returned to it twice in a single evening before I sent for you. I did not tell you that when you walked into my library 3 nights ago and refused to sit in the chair I had pointed to, I understood, in the space of perhaps 4 seconds, that I had made a much larger decision than I had intended to make. I am telling you now, on the floor of your father's parlor, because I rode 18 hours, and I will not waste them on the parts of the truth that are convenient. She was looking at him. Her hand, holding the match, had begun to shake. "Cassian, I have not finished. Please, I haven't finished. I came here to say one more thing, and if I do not say it now, I shall lose the courage of the road. Marigold, listen to me. I do not want you to come back to Halverston as the bride my grandmother thinks you are. I do not want you to come back as the bargain we struck in the library. I want you to come back, if you come back, as the woman you were the first night you would not sit down. I do not know what kind of marriage that makes. I do not know if you can love a man who proposed to you over a debt. I do not know if I deserve you to. I know only that I cannot continue with the agreement we made, because the agreement we made is a smaller thing than what I am asking for now, and it would not be honest of me to marry you on the smaller terms while wanting the larger ones in private. So I am telling you, on this floor, that He stopped. He could not, for a moment, get the word out. The match in her hand had burned down to her fingers. She did not seem to notice. That I love you, Marigold. I have been afraid of the word for some time. I am still afraid of it. I'm saying it anyway, Because you taught me, 3 nights ago, that there are things one says even when one is afraid. I do not require you to say it back. I do not require you to come back to Halverston. I require only that you know it, so that whatever you decide on Saturday, you decide it with the whole of the information. Do not marry me to save your sister. Do not marry me to honor a debt. Do not marry me to protect a dying woman. If you marry me because the man on the floor in front of you has told you the truth, and you have decided you can bear him. The match went out. In the dark, Marigold made a small sound that was not a word. Then she set the dead match aside, very carefully, as though it were a thing of value, and she reached forward, and she took his face in both her cold hands, and she said, in a voice that was very nearly steady, "You absolute fool. Of course I am coming back. I was going to come back on Saturday. I had decided in the inn before the coach had even left. You had. I left, so that I would be coming back as a woman who had chosen, and not as a woman who had been bought. I left for me, Cassian. I was always coming back. Then, yes, whatever you were about to ask. Yes." He kissed her. He kissed her on the cold floor of her father's parlor, with his ruined boots and his soaked coat, and his hands that smelled of the road. And he kissed her the way a man kisses a woman when he has ridden 18 hours to do it. And somewhere in the doorway behind them, very quietly, a 15-year-old girl with their mother's green eyes set down her candle and went back upstairs to bed, because she had decided, at the age of 15, that some things did not require a witness, and that this was one of them. They were married within the fortnight, as agreed, not by special license in a corner. In the small private chapel at Halverston, which had not been used for a wedding in 41 years, and which the Dowager had ordered, opened the moment her grandson's letter had arrived from London. She had instructed the chapel be filled with white roses out of season, which had required a great deal of inconvenience to a great many people, and which had pleased her enormously. She was carried down to it in a chair. She wore garnets. She had not, in 3 years, looked so well. The witnesses were the same 4 she had chosen for the presentation, with one addition. Mrs. Liscombe stood at the back of the chapel in a new gray gown that was not, this time, the gray of the household. And Marigold caught her eye once during the service, and saw, with a small private satisfaction, that the older woman's hands were not tied on her shawl. Honora carried Marigold's flowers. When the bishop reached the question of impediments, the Dowager, from her chair in the front pew, said, in a voice that was small but perfectly audible to the entire chapel, "There are none. I have inspected the matter personally." The bishop blinked. He recovered. He continued. But this, the wedding itself, was not the public declaration. The public declaration was 3 weeks later, at the New Year's ball at Cotter House, which the Dowager had insisted upon attending, despite the physicians, despite the weather, despite her own visible fragility. Because, she said, "I will not have the county imagine that I disapprove of my grandson's wife, and I will not have my grandson's wife imagine that I have hidden her." Lady Persephone Cotter wasn't at her own family's ball. She was by then in a small house outside Geneva, with the man Cassian had been raised to call brother. And she had written a single letter to the Dowager, which had been read once, folded, and placed in the locked drawer of the writing desk in the Dowager's bedroom, and which would never, by anyone, be discussed again. The ballroom at Cotter House was the largest in the county. There were perhaps 400 people in the room, and every one of them, when Cassian Vale entered with his new wife on his arm, turned to look. The whispers began at once. She heard, in the first 30 seconds, "Governess, isn't she? The Ashcombe girl. No fortune, no family to speak of." She heard the word unsuitable twice. She heard the word desperate once. Cassian heard it too. She felt him hear it. His hand, at the small of her back, did not tighten. His step did not change, but she felt the precise moment at which the man beside her decided what he was about to do. He stopped, in the middle of the ballroom. He did not lead her to the dancing. He did not lead her to the refreshment. He stopped in the open space directly beneath the central chandelier, where the light was strongest, and he turned to face the room. The room, by the small instinct of crowds, went quiet. "My friends," he said. His voice wasn't raised. It did not need to be. "I have not, in some years, been a man who makes speeches. Tonight I shall make one, and it will be brief." The orchestra, by some signal she did not see, stopped playing. "3 weeks ago," he said, "I married this woman. I married her in my own chapel, with my own grandmother as witness. Before I introduce her to you formally, I wish to address something I have been told has been said about her in this house and in others. I have been told that she has been called unsuitable. I have been told that she has been called desperate. I have been told that there are those in this county who consider it a matter of regret that I have not, in your phrase, married well." The room had not made a sound. "I wish to inform you," he said, "that I have married better than any man in this room has any business marrying. I wish to inform you that the woman beside me walked into my library on a wet afternoon and refused to sit in the chair I pointed to, and that no one in my life, not my father, not my grandmother, not my tutors, not the lords I sit with at Westminster, has ever before declined a chair I had pointed to, and that I hadn't understood, until she did it, how badly I needed someone to. I wish to inform you that she is the bravest person I have ever met. I wish to inform you that she is the kindest. I wish to inform you that the next person who applies the word unsuitable to my wife will discover, at some inconvenience to themselves, that the man she married is a man of considerable resources and very long memory." A silence. Long. Absolute. Then, from the front of the room, from a chair that had been carried in for her, the Dowager Duchess of Halverston, very slowly, lifted her hands and clapped. 3 times. No more, no less. The sound was small, but in the hush of 400 people, it was the loudest sound in England. Lady Wraxhall, beside her, joined. Then the bishop. Then the cousins. Then, by the strange propulsion of crowds that have been told what to do by the people they most fear, the entire ballroom, slowly at first, and then, in a rolling wave of sound, was applauding. And Marigold Vale, formerly Marigold Ashcombe, formerly a woman with a sister and no future, stood in the middle of the marble floor with her husband's hand at the small of her back, and understood, for the first time in her life, that she had been seen. She turned her face to her husband, and she said, very quietly, so that only he could hear, "Thank you." And he said, just as quietly, "It was not a kindness, Marigold. It was the truth. There is a difference. You taught me." The orchestra began again. He led her into the dance. The Dowager Duchess of Halverston died in the spring, on a Tuesday afternoon, in the chair by the window of the rose sitting room, with the sun on her face. Marigold was holding her hand. Cassian was on her other side. Honora had been sent for, because the Dowager, in the last week, had asked for the girl every morning, and had given her, that final Tuesday, a small enamel brooch in the shape of a wren that had once belonged to her own grandmother. The brooch was on the collar of Honora's gown when the old woman closed her eyes. She did not speak at the end. She had said, the day before, everything she intended to say, and what she had said, to Marigold, alone, with the door closed, was this: "I was wrong about a great many things in my life, child. I have been right about you." That was all. It was enough. 3 weeks after the funeral, going through the Dowager's writing desk, Marigold found, in a locked drawer she had been given the key to, a small folded letter addressed in a hand she did not at first recognize. It was addressed to the woman my grandson marries. It was not sealed. It had been written, the date inside told her, 3 months before the dowager had ever met her. My dear, if you are reading this, you have married him, and I am gone. I am sorry to have left you to the work of him. He has been broken in places I could not reach since he was 8, and I have spent 21 years pretending I did not see it, because seeing it would have required me to admit I had failed him, and I was not strong enough until the last year of my life to admit such a thing. I do not know who you are. I shall, by the time you read this, have known you for some weeks or months, and I expect I shall have been very difficult about it, because I have been very difficult about everything for 60 years, and it is too late to stop. Forgive me in advance. I have always loved more than I have shown, and shown more than I have said. One thing only. Do not let him close the door of his library against you. He will try. He has been trying, against everyone, since he was 8 years old. Sit in the chair across from his and refuse to leave it. And one day he will look up and discover that the door has not been closed in some considerable time, and that he is the better for it. Yours, with a hope I have not earned the right to express. Eunice Vale. Marigold read the letter twice. She folded it. She did not put it back in the drawer. She walked, with the letter in her hand, out of the rose sitting room, down the long gallery, and into the library, where her husband was sitting at his desk, going through papers he had been going through since breakfast, and was not, in any meaningful sense, seeing. She crossed the room. She sat in the chair across from his. She did not say anything. She set the letter on the desk between them, and she folded her hands, and she waited. He read it. When he had finished, he put his hand flat on the letter, the way a man steadies himself against a wall, and he did not lift his face for some time. When he did, his eyes were wet, and he was not ashamed of it, which was perhaps the largest single change Marigold had seen in him in the months of their marriage. She knew, he said. She knew. All of it. All of it. He breathed out. Marigold. Yes. Stay in the chair. She smiled. I hadn't, she said, intended to leave it. Outside, in the gardens of Halverston Hall, the first roses of the year were coming into bloom along the south wall, and a 15-year-old girl in a blue dress with a wren-shaped brooch at her collar was walking among them with a basket on her arm, cutting one of each color for the table, and singing softly a song her mother had taught her when she was small. She was not afraid of the house anymore. None of them were. Thank you for being here, for staying with Marigold and Cassian through the rain and the firelight, through the bargain that became a marriage and the marriage that became a love. Stories like this one exist because you make space for them, because somewhere out there, you believe, as I do, that the people we become when we are seen properly are not the people the world first asked us to be. That courage is quieter than we think and kinder, that the best gestures are not the grand ones in ballrooms, but the ones made on cold floors at 4 a.m. when no one is watching. If this story moved you, if there was a line or a moment that stayed with you, I would love to hear about it. Your words shape every story I write next. And if you would like more like this, romances with quiet hearts and patient tenderness, you are warmly invited to subscribe so that we can meet again in another firelit room with another window full of rain. Until then, take care of yourself. Be brave in the small ways. And do not be afraid, ever, to refuse the chair you have been pointed to.